My name is Tristan Grove from the IPSE Press team. I'm here with Jonathan Lima-Matthews from the policy team. We're here to do the second IPSE news roundup. Today we're going to be talking about the Uber ban in York, the employment stats released on Wednesday, and of course IPSE's own vulnerable self-employment report. So probably one of the biggest stories in the world of self-employment this week was the news that Uber has now been banned in York. It's the third city in the UK to ban Uber, after London did so some time ago, and there's an ongoing dispute about that. And also Sheffield at the end of last month banned Uber, although that's now been revoked. Now, what seems to be behind this license refusal in York? Is it connected to the ban in London?
So it's important to remember that two issues are very separate, not to conflate them. What this is all about is the fact that there are a group of Uber drivers who believe that they're employees or workers. There's a lot's been going on recently. Gig economy has become really, really popular as a way of working, but that's caused some confusion amongst these people about whether they are employees or workers. What they believe is they are. So they've taken Uber to the courts to prove this. What we would like to see is the implementation of a statutory definition of self-employment. And with that, we would see the rights of self-employed people who believe they are genuinely self-employed, they would be protected. But also, what that would do is it would bring rights to those who believe they are genuinely employed or workers. Yeah. And it would break away that confusion completely.
I see. Thank you. I know that's very useful. The other big news this week in the world of self-employment is the release of overall employment statistics on Wednesday. And the ONS's data showed that while overall employment in the UK has dipped since last quarter, it's actually up 325,000 compared to the same time last year. Now, how much of this rise in employment was down to the self-employed? What do you think has been driving the growth of self-employment?
Well, we're really pleased for the seventh year in a row, self-employment has seen a rise. So this year, compared to last, we've seen an increase of 50,000 self-employed people. And we think that's really down to the attractiveness of self-employment. So it offers a lot of flexibility compared with employment. So that's great if you have parental responsibilities, for example. You can choose who you want to work for. And I spoke to one self-employed person who told me self-employment is a bit like a series of mini retirements. So they can work for a few months, save up, go on a lovely trip abroad, and then come back to work as and when they like. So it's very, very attractive for many people.
And of course, although it's attractive to many people, I suppose there is some concern at the moment about certain self-employed people because of the rise in inflation we saw this week as well. So hitting 3.1%. With more people moving into self-employment than ever, should we be concerned about this rising inflation? What are the risks here?
Well, it's really important to remember that this is an issue for everyone and not just self-employed people. We are seeing an increase in inflation, so that's at 3.1%, and at the same time, we're not seeing a rise in wages, which are staying at around 2.5%. So what that means in practice is we're getting paid less and we're taking away less in our weekly supermarket shop, for example. And what we would like to see is more support for people who are perhaps on the more squeezed end of self-employment. We're calling this group the vulnerable self-employed.
Well, and of course, on the subject of vulnerable self-employment, this week is the release of IPSE's own report, Under Pressure, about the vulnerable self-employed. So Jonathan, you were one of the people who was leading on the report. What exactly is vulnerability among the self-employed, and how many self-employed people are actually vulnerable?
So in this report that we did with the Community Trade Union, we understood that there was a problem around people who were perhaps in vulnerable self-employment, but we didn't quite have a working definition of what that meant and how many people were in it. So we looked at the available kind of data out there and identified kind of a set of 3 different characteristics that we believe would make someone vulnerable, and that includes people who are perhaps in low pay, who have less autonomy in their day-to-day work, and who are less financially secure. So that basically means they're perhaps unable to pay into a pension. And we believe that within this model, if you kind of have 2 to 3 of those characteristics, that means you're quite likely to be in vulnerable self-employment. So when we look at the self-employed community at large, we've identified that around 9 to 13% of self-employed people are at risk of being vulnerable. So that's between 300 to 500,000 people who are at risk. Now that's really important to know that they're at risk of being in vulnerable self-employment, because we can't say for sure that everyone in those in those brackets are in vulnerable self-employment, because it doesn't quite take into account individual circumstances. So the fact that they might be married and have partners who can perhaps support them more. So yeah.
And so in terms of, presumably within that number there are going to be people who are genuinely vulnerable. Mm-hmm. Well, what can the government do to support them and improve conditions for them?
So we really like to see universal credit, as one example, be reformed. It's currently working really badly for self-employed people. We'd also like to see an increased number of training opportunities for the self-employed. Currently 10% of those in vulnerable self-employment have no qualifications at all. And we'd also like to see the government doing more to stamp out late payments. Lots of people in self-employment complain to us about this, and we'd really like to see the Small Business Commissioner doing more about this.
Okay. Thank you. Now, I think this is going to be our last news roundup before we break up for Christmas. Parliament is rising next Friday, but there are one or two things to look out for in the coming weeks. In particular, a new review by the government into auto-enrolment, especially for the self-employed. Can you just tell a little bit more about auto-enrolment and the self-employed?
Sure. So automatic enrolment was brought in a couple of years ago, and what that basically means is that companies that have employees have to provide those employees with a workplace pension scheme. Those people are perfectly entitled to opt out if they'd like to, but what we've seen is that for employees at least, it's been a really great success, and the majority of people have stayed into their company workplace pension schemes. What the government is now doing is reviewing this process, looking at how successful it's been, and also seeing whether this would work for the self-employed community at large.
And yeah, so that's coming up next week. And other than that, I think we're going to leave it there until after Christmas. So from everyone at IPSE, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and we'll see you in 2018.